What's up, podcast listeners? This is Nkechi Alameen, sociologist of race and place and Black Appalachian experiences.
And this is William Otsum, the director of the Black and Appalachia Project, public historian, and community outreach for East Tennessee Public Television.
What's up, William? We get to do an episode together.
Well, since when?
Well, I know you've been trying to avoid this, but we pulled your ass right in. Welcome to being a co-host on the podcast. It is great to do an episode with you. And today we're actually doing a special episode. Okay, William, so our episode today, which is actually the plenary session of the Appalachian Studies Association conference. We didn't get to make the conference last year, but we're here today for this digital version of the conference. And we're so excited. Today, we're talking about Black experiences with Appalachian Studies Association, right? Experiences with the conference. We're talking about an intergenerational perspective. We have a interdisciplinary perspective on how Black folks experience this conference.
And an intergalactic experience.
Also an intergalactic. But we're gonna jump right in. We're gonna jump right in. We talked to some really cool guests, and we're gonna jump right in to our first person.
So the first person we talked to is somebody with a long history with the Appalachian Studies Conference, Dr. Wilburn Hayden. He's up in Canada, so let's see what he had to say.
We want to kick things off by just asking you to give us a little bit of background on who you are and the type of work that you do.
All right. Well, right now I'm a pensioner.
Okay.
And then I'm a retired professor emeritus, senior scholar at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. That's where I live now. Most of my life has been in the Appalachian region. I grew up in Forsyth County, Winston-Salem, which is in the foothills of North Carolina. And never really thought of myself as Appalachian until in 1973. I finished my MSW, Master's of Social Work, and I did an internship as a university instructor at Clinch Valley College in Wise, Virginia, in the coal fields. And one of the instructors was Helen Lewis, Dr. Helen Lewis. And as you know, Helen Lewis is sort of the matron of Appalachian Studies. And she took me, among others, under her wings and led me to the path to recognizing I have a Black identity, but also have an Appalachian identity. And so since '73, I've been working primarily looking at Black issues, but I've done other issues in Appalachia as well. I've done a couple of publications, some journal articles, and been really looking at every 10 years, the census. I would try to pull together the count of Black people since I think it was since the 80s census may have been when I first started doing that. So in some different periodicals, you will see this sort of summary of, and it more was descriptive, just demographic of where Black people were and the numbers all across. It started out with 395 counties. Last it was at 423, I think it is, that we now call Appalachia. In terms of relationship to the Appalachian Studies Conference, or Appalachian Studies Association, as it later became, I was in one of the first meetings, and again under Dr. Helen Lewis at in Tennessee, New Market, Tennessee, at the center, and which it was the pre-meeting. So this was in the spring of 1973, that a bunch of Appalachian scholar activists got together and began talking. And then I went off to Canada for my PhD at the University of Toronto and came back, and there was this association that formed a conference, and I got actively involved again on the encouragement of Dr. Helen Lewis. And so I've been part of the organization formally since, I guess it must have been 84 is when I really got really into Appalachian Studies Association. And in the late 80s, I was president of the association, of the Appalachian Studies Association, and program chair the year after that. And have been in leadership positions from those early years, and still involved in a number of committees, the Journal Committee, a couple of the awards and steering committees. I've been in it. I've covered a lot of bases in terms of leadership within the association. As I think back on it, there were very few Black people involved in those early days. And many of us, Ed Cowell was very much, John was very much part of the association. Bill Turner was another person that was involved in it. And for a long time, in terms of a lot of scholarship, it was the three of us that were more actively involved than anybody, and consistently over the years. Of course, Cabell and Turner's book in 1985 on Black Appalachian was the first publication, and it collected a series of articles on Black people. And then over the years, I think it's been a slow pace. There's been some times you wonder, why am I still here as a Black person in the association? But then I think in recent years, there were a lot of attention started being turned toward Black people in Appalachia, as well as other groups, particularly as an gay population. So we really have reached out to get beyond the sort of white mainstream what Appalachian has been defined. And I think this conference, coming out of the summer, really the one coming up, the Zoom online conference of the Study Association, clearly makes a stand about where the association is in terms of race and race in Appalachia. So I think we've come full circle. I mean, clearly there's a lot more we need to do. We need to try to figure out how to get more students involved, Black students more involved in Appalachian studies. I think ones that I've met over the years, once they got into it, like me, they recognize this is part of my identity, and it really become very active in making and presenting a Black Appalachian standpoint. There's a lot of good research been done. I mean, if some of it shows up in Appalachian Study Association, it's still a lag in trying to get publications of Black work, but it's coming. I think there's enough of Black scholars now and people looking at Blacks as an integral part of Appalachia. That I say, yeah, we need to include that story in what we're talking about. I'm really, and particularly, I'm part of the Weatherford review of books published 2020, and I think we're looking at 20 different books that were published last year from an Appalachian studies, and I'm really encouraged. Even though many of the books don't have a specific focus around race, like none of them actually have, but nearly all of them have some section or some part that identified the contribution of Black people as part of the literature as we emerge in Appalachian studies. So I was really encouraged in reviewing those books and saying, wow, okay, we're coming there, we're getting there. And it says, it wasn't like just a token, just sort of sticking something in as sometimes you see, but it was in context with what was going on in the writers and what they were trying to talk about. And it was just a natural flow to say, yes, Black people were part of the struggle as well.
You came in 1984. Bill and Ed's book came out in 1985. What was it like to be Black in those spaces and operate? I know you went to Clinch Valley College, so it wasn't completely foreign to you, but talk about like what that was like to be in those spaces. And
Bill's and Ed's book really just sort of put us on the map. I mean, I think it's a test to the strength of that book, and that years later, many people still requiring that book to be read. I mean, and that's just saying just how strong I think it was. I don't know if you're aware of it, but three of us, Black scholars, have joined with Bill in doing I'm not call it a revision, but some follow-up from that book. And hopefully in the matter of a couple of years, how long it takes to get things out now, there will be a more current follow-up to the book. But as it was when it was introduced, it was just a hallmark. I mean, it was the first real statement of saying we exist in the mountains. I can't think of anybody, Black or white, that was involved in association that wasn't really just excited about having this book. And I know from Bill and myself and Ed, the book also triggered people wanted to hear us talk about it. So I got a lot of calls to make speeches, make talks, share my research. And it just was, I guess, maybe a pivot moment, I guess people would talk about, in pushing Blacks into the forefront of Appalachian studies. Yeah, it was a good piece of work.
I'm also a little bit curious about what the association looked. I know you mentioned briefly that it was just a few of you all there, but what was that experience as a Black scholar in the association? What was the day-to-day or the year-to-year experience like?
The association is made up of both people from the region within the region who are academics. So I don't think there was that type of atmosphere that say when I walked down the streets of Wise, Virginia in 1973, it was something really odd. I don't think at the time no other Black person was living in Wise, Virginia at the time. And so there was some hostility, there were some stares, there was a whole bunch of stuff going on. But within the association, I never felt that that people saw me any different than another scholar actively trying to get a voice out. I mean, the association has been, I think, yeah, I mean, I can't say anything bad about what the association say. Have we done enough? Should we have done more? Yes, that is possibly true. But, we weren't walking away from it. We weren't, it wasn't an atmosphere that says that, you had to be treated different, but you stand on your own merit and your own ability. And you relate to colleagues who over the years, man, I go to the Appalachian Studies Conference now, most of that is a homecoming, has an ability to fellowship with the people I've known for 30, 40 years, and it's very welcoming, to be amongst people that you've seen once a year, usually, all those number of years. And, it's just been a welcome environment for me. And I think for many Blacks, and I don't know anybody who say this differently, who really got involved in the association, I think that's been welcoming as well. The association has really been a good home to really explore issues around race in the Appalachian Mountains.
And as far as I know you said that you served as president. Do you know any other Black folks who served as president of the association?
Yeah, no, I know in recent times, and no, I don't think there's many other Black person that's been elected president of the association.
Whenever you talk with other scholars outside of the region, particularly in Canada, what kind of reaction or questions do you get from Black folks not in the region about the work at the ASA and the work in Appalachia? And what are some of the things that you try to, impart to them about us in the region?
Yeah, I mean, many people outside the region, Black people outside the region, that bought into the myth that Appalachia is a white, society, and so when I talk about it, people, pay attention because it's a mystery. It's something that they never heard of, and so yeah, it's been curiosity. It's been people really. I haven't got the pushback about no, there hadn't been. It's been more like, wow, I didn't know that. That's something else, And part of it is, and this is from my own research, is that as Black people in the mountains, we do differ in terms of settlements, and that most of us find ourselves in the small towns and cities of Appalachian region, whereas most whites are in the rural aspects of the region. And so that sort of skews if you just look at the rural aspects of Appalachia, you say there are no Black people. But if you go to Asheville, Pittsburgh, Birmingham, you say, whoa, where does people come from? So that part of it, is something that people have to adjust to the fact that Appalachia is just not all rural. It is not all isolated communities. We have cities and towns, and that's, it's part of the Black experience. Many Blacks in those same areas, there's usually a large employer or university or such. So unlike in the rural areas, the opportunity for employment wasn't there so much, especially if you're in the, even the exploited resources or farming. But in the cities, there were opportunities.
So talk about how you've seen the association change.
Last conference that wasn't canceled, it was just refreshing to see so many Black people there. So, I mean, if you talk about the proof is in the pudding, it's clear for me as from when there were very few of us to be able to walk through the association and bump into a Black person, which wasn't the case years ago. And that's because I think the association really took it upon themselves. Let's reach out. Let's figure out ways to get more local Blacks in where we have the conference at, get involved, the scholarships involved for registration, reaching out. So I think there's been a really good faith effort on trying to bring in people, not just the scholars and researchers, but local people who have something to say and bring their voice into the conversation. Because the association has always been, seen as more scholars and researchers, but it also had a focus of activists. It had a focus of local people. And so when you really expand that, then that means you can bring in Black people who at the time, the academy may not be rewarding enough of us out, but there are enough of us in communities and even in some of the hollers that when given a chance to come talk about their experience, they jump at it. And I think the association has really made a really good attempt to try to do that. Again, have we done enough? No, but it's not an easy road. And it's not, to make it happen overnight.
What about that change within the field of itself, within Black Appalachian Studies? How have you seen change from the time when you and Bill and Ed were at among very few people to maybe where we are now?
A lot of scholarship has to do with publications and articles, and that becomes more academic. And I think we've lagged behind. I mean, and there may be some economic reasons about publishers and whatever, but it is not, that part of it has not, in my opinion, reached the full potential, come close to that. There still seems to be a lag in terms of trying to get Black scholars, researchers work out front in the mainstream Appalachian press and literature. So that part of it, I would say, we made some steps. There are a few articles and stuff that show up. That all the many books that have come out, and there have been numerous of books about Black people written by white scholars and researchers, but you just, there hadn't been, it's that we need to do better as a field to getting the Black voice out there in our publications, particularly in the forms of books.
You mentioned earlier about undergraduate students not being, not having as many. I guess, what do you see as responsible for that, or what role might the association play in improving that, or can you give us a little bit more of your thoughts on just sort of the how undergraduate students are engaging with Black Appalachian Studies?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think like many undergraduate students, Black undergraduate students don't necessarily see themselves at that level as scholars, whether it's Black scholars, women's studies, or whatever it is. And so therefore, we're depending on people who develop consciousness in their studies to want to pursue that specific in there. The number of universities throughout the region now that have Appalachian Studies programs. And I don't know, because I haven't really taught at a university that has had a degree in Appalachian Studies, but I suspect that whether rightly or not, that I think perhaps Black students on those campuses may see, just as we historically define the region as white. So I would think, and they have no data to support it, that on campus, if you look around and say who's in Appalachian Studies, I'm not sure. And so hopefully, people who may hear this can, let me know if that is the case. But my sense is that most of the Appalachian Studies programs won't have a good showing of Blacks. And part of it's both programs ability to outreach, but also like myself, coming out of graduate school, I was an Appalachian, but I didn't know it. Dr. Helen Lewis had to not convince me, but show me a path to that. So I think many Black students in undergraduate programs haven't really had an opportunity to reflect on or be encouraged to think about themselves as part of this Appalachian heritage. And that goes back to, because the image was created that it was all white people. So even though you're living in a cold camp, a former cold camp, you came out of that experience, but when you think back on it, you didn't think yourself as Appalachian. And there was no reinforcements. I mean, this is all related to articles, textbooks, journals, all this stuff. If you're not seeing yourself, if you're not hearing your voice as an undergraduate, none of the readings that you're being assigned was written by an Appalachian scholar, because, well, we're not out there. So so there's not much happening to encourage or even help Black undergraduate students to say, yes, I'm an Appalachian, and this is a field that I can go into. And so I'm really pushing your question to the secondary level, that I think it has to start there. And I think we as Appalachian Studies, various school teachers across the region, have a role, and I think we are beginning to meet up to it, to make sure that Black content is in the secondary schools, is in the high schools, and that people can begin to see themselves at an early age, and as they move into undergraduate school, can see, oh yeah, that is something that was interesting to me at that time. So it's all tied together. We need to have more scholars turning out stuff. We need to have more opportunities to get that out. We need curriculums to be able to have the resources be there. We need academic programs being seen as visible for Black people in it. So it all ties together. And I guess my approach to a lot of stuff is that it's not one silver bullet. It's that all of us doing our part at whatever level we are at to ensure that the content is there, that race is part of the agenda. And I think we can get to a point that it won't be seen as added on, but it's very much integrated into what we call Appalachia.
So do you have any good stories to tell on Bill Turner, or any good stories that anything funny that's happened over the years?
Well, Bill, Ed, we go back a long ways. So there are lots of stories that he could tell of me, and Ed's no longer with us, but we've had disagreements. So no, it's been a good ride with the brothers. Actually, is another part of aspect of it. Unfortunately, a lot of the work been done has been by Black male scholars. And there now seems to be, especially in the association, an opportunities for women scholars, Appalachian Black women scholars, to get more involved and connected. But for years, it was the male agenda, And so, I mean, I welcome that, and I think that that's going to add additional voices to our presence as a people within this region, to see women really, telling the story as a Black person within this region. And so, going back to the three of us, it was a lot. We were very much connected to each other and have a lot of stories.
So that was Wilburn Hayden, and he had a lot of history. He's got a lot of history with the Appalachian Studies Conference, like there from the beginning. So that leads me to want to know, Dr. Nkechi Alameen, what's been your experience with the Appalachian Studies Conference?
Yeah, so I've only had the opportunity to go to the conference once, and it was actually, coming out of like really getting comfortable with myself as a scholar of Black Appalachian Studies. I went to the conference in Asheville, the Blacks in Western North Carolina and Southern Appalachia Conference at UNC Asheville the year before, and I just I felt like, oh, this is my space. These Appalachian things, I felt really good after coming out of that conference. It was probably my best conference experience, and so after that conference, I was like, okay, well, let me look into more Appalachian conferences, right? Appalachian Studies conferences. And that's where I sort of found the association. And I was like, I can submit something. And I did. And, my experience with the conference wasn't horrible. It wasn't bad, but I just felt completely out of place. I felt completely out of place. I got to, it was at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. And so I went up there, didn't know anybody, didn't know how to get plugged in. I didn't see many Black faces. The only person that I recognized at that conference was a friend, Forrest, who I had met at the other conference the year before. And it was just, so I did my talk and I was out. I didn't even stick around because I was just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel here. I don't see any Black folks. I didn't see many sessions. It was just felt like a fish out of water. It was, it was just, yeah. So I was so excited to go into it as a Black scholar of Appalachian Studies. But when I got there, it was just kind of flat. It was really flat.
That didn't stop you from hopping back in. We were supposed to go to Lexington, right? But we'll get into that later.
Right. Yeah, it definitely, I still continued with the work and, it's all good. But, when I think about what I was looking for that conference, what I was going to that conference looking for was to find other scholars, senior scholars in the region who were doing this work. And when I think about senior scholars or my senior scholars who I feel like are doing amazing work around Black Appalachian Studies, I think of Dr. Karita Brown.
Wouldn't it be great to talk with her?
Wouldn't it be great to talk with her? I'm such a fangirl.
Without further ado, Dr.
Karita Brown.
Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Karida L. Brown. I'm a professor of sociology and African American studies at UCLA. I also serve as the director of racial equity and action for the Los Angeles Lakers. So I'm a Black woman with two full-time jobs, but yet and still so happy to be here for this podcast session. I'm the author of the book Gone Home, Race and Roots Through Appalachia, which was published, wow, 3 years ago in 2018 with UNC Press, the best press out there in the world. I love them so much. So shout out to my editor, Lucas Church. And that book really just examined the transformation of Black subjectivity in and through the mountains of Eastern Kentucky through this pre and post civil rights era. So it's a study that really, Blackness is the focus for that book. And the interiority of what it means to be a Black person rooted in place. But it's a book that moves through space and time, and it follows the intergenerational migration of African Americans to and through Harlan County, Kentucky. That book was not only, my first book, it was my dissertation. So I learned a great deal from that project. It was a national oral history project, and I encourage anybody who's listening, all of the oral histories from that book, 153 of them, are archived with UNC, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, with the Southern Historical Collection in a archive called eCamp. You can look that up online and listen to any of them and hear these amazing stories about the Black experience, particular to Harlan County, Kentucky. But that book was also spiritually important for me, my growth and my liberation, because it was a chance for me to spiritually go home. I grew up born and reared in Long Island, New York. My mother and father are from Lynch, Kentucky. My grandparents on both sides uh, both migrated from Alabama to Lynch, where both my grandfathers were coal miners for US Steel for combined almost 100 years. Both my grandmothers were homemakers for their many, many children, 11 on my mother's side, 16 on my father's side. So my roots are there. All of my family is buried up in those mountains. I have a very special connection to that place, a love for that place. My soul rests in that place in many ways. But, you know, your parents don't tell you everything when you're growing up. So I didn't necessarily know or understand the stories that are buried in that place. And that study that became Gone Home really helped me return to my roots and understand it through a different lens, through a sociological lens that was illuminating for me.
Dr. Brown, tell me about your experience with the Appalachian Studies Conference. When did you become aware that it was even a thing, and what was kind of your first remembrance of engaging with that?
Oh man, it was either 2011 or 2012 that I went. And it was formative for me. I'll also say up front, I'm a raggedy member. Okay, I'm fair weather and all of that, but I will give ASA props where they're due. It was formative for me because it was I went as a graduate student. I think I was second year. It was my very first academic conference. It was in Boone, North Carolina, and I went with Dr. Bill Turner. He took me, and I flew into some airport. We met there. I think it was Charlotte. He rented a car, and then we rode up to Boone together and talked and laughed the whole way up there, and went to the conference. And he introduced me to lifelong friends and colleagues. So it was very much I came in on a chariot, I would say. It was a good experience. At that time, I had not formed my dissertation idea, so I didn't even know really what I was going to be up to with my research. And I poked my head in and out. Yeah, and I don't really remember much about the conference per se, except for one moment. The keynote speaker was Bill Ferris. That speech, it was like, this big old packed room, hundreds and hundreds of people, mostly all white people. Me and Dr. Turner were like two flies in a thing of buttermilk. And here comes this old white man getting on the stage, finna talk about some old blues in the Mississippi Delta. And I'm like rolling my eyes like, oh my God, how do I get out of here? I do not want to sit through this. And that was the keynote. And Bill got on that stage and I was crying through the whole thing. I'm sitting there, and he was so irreverent. I think the person who introduced him was like very specific. Okay, and you will speak for 45 minutes, and then we will have time. He went for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And I'm sitting there, I loved every minute of it. And it was, I was learning cognitively, but it was what it was doing to my soul on the inside. And at some point, I'm looking to the left and right, and I see these white folks are like bored and sit there like that. I'm loving it. And I made a decision right then and there. I said, I don't know what I'm doing, but whatever I do with my research, I want to make people feel like this person made me feel. That turned on something for me. Like, this is the power of scholarship. This is what research can do. And Dr. Turner introduced me to Bill Ferris. I met him. He became a mentor of mine. He served on my dissertation committee and supported me through developing my project. But that all happened at ASA.
I want to think a little bit about where we're going from here. Where do we go as an association or as young Black scholars doing work related to Appalachia? Where do you see us going from here? Or what would you like to see in the future as it relates to scholarship in this region, Black scholarship in this region?
That's a dope question. So can I just give it to you 100?
100.
I ain't stunting white folks no more. Like 2020 gave me everything I needed to just feel like I wrote a mission statement for myself, and then my husband and I wrote one for our family. And the thing that I would like to articulate in this space is that our commitment is to resounding Black love. And what that means is pouring into loving on, exploring in all of its fullness, heterogeneity, and contradictions, Blackness. And that's where my energy, genius, resources are going to be going forward. And I'll tell you how I came to that. The theater of anti-Black violence that we had to witness this summer, all while sitting at home, not being able to go, and all of that, was for me a moment of reckoning that this problem is white people's job to decide to deal with or not. They might not. And that's a choice, but it is not my, this is not, I don't have a dog in this fight, pretty much. Like, what I recognized is I cannot spend another breath because we're not guaranteed another breath. I can't spend another breath hoping that white folks are going to do what they need to do to reckon with white supremacy, whiteness, white privilege. These are things that we've got over 150 years of literature on, empirical data, studies, all that kind of stuff. So there's something to learn from and do with. But that's white folks, they need to do that. What I need to do is, my pen is mighty. I need to write. Then I need to also be in community with other Black creatives, writers, filmmakers, artists. I need to write to Black children and tell them that they're loved. I need to be in spaces where we're really thinking about what liberatory frameworks look like in the digital age, in post-COVID, where we gonna be at, where we going, what we thinking about. I wanna laugh. I want to hug. I want to cry because I lost way too many people in this last year and a half. And all of those things are not a anti-white stamp position. What it is a formal commitment to Blackness, to just resounding Black love. And I just hope that my colleagues who are not Black will can understand that this is not an affront or rejection of you personally or other things. What it is when are we allowed to just recommit to ourselves and to love ourselves and to heal? And that's I'm taking the time because I love myself that much and I love Black people that much to do that in sanctuary, not as a spectacle.
Well, we've taken a survey and it's unanimous.
It is. It really is. It really is. And it's so crazy. Like, I'm all kinds of tingly with feelings because this is, I think we're all here. We're all in this space. We all kind of have the same, when we talked to Jillian last week, it's the same thing. Like, we're all here. And so that makes me excited. That makes me excited about, it makes me excited about Black futures.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm so excited and so happy for this moment. And I'm thinking about like sociology, right? And where, just thinking about what you said earlier about not studying white folks. And what does that look like even in like sociology? Like, how do we do sociology? So much of sociology has been sort of in response to, looking at Black experiences in response to structural inequalities and racism and all of the works. And I'm just thinking more about how do we do sociology in this new frame? And of course, I know that, people like Xandria and Marcus and yourself, you are definitely setting the trail for me when I look at, what I want my work to look like. Where is sociology going? Where's Black sociology going? And what nuggets you have for young scholars like myself, who are also kind of trying to figure out a place between public sociology and more, I don't know, inside of the academy sociology, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, so I invoke this quote, just like, so many of us Black academics do, where Toni Morrison said, racism is a distraction, and do not let it distract you from your work. And I think that is prescriptive in this moment. So I'll say this. So as a sociologist, my expertise is in systemic racism, right? So I study that system. I study power. I study institutions and landscapes that allow for the reproduction of this inequity and inequality along racial and gender lines amongst many. However, I'm also a scholar of Blackness. And I have to remind people all the time that those are two distinct things. Blackness is not systemic racism. We didn't do that. So if you look at Gone Home, for example, and the writerly methodology that I developed to produce that book, you know, because I talk a lot in the, there's like a methodological appendix in the back of the book, and I talk about the architecture of the study itself. That's one thing. But what I talk less about is there was also a literary methodology to that book, being clear about who am I talking to? And if I'm talking to a particular audience, and every writer has to decide that, right? Who are you talking to? If I'm talking to a particular audience, and for me, I was talking to vernacular Black people. I actually wasn't even talking to Black people in the academy, per se. Then the language and vocabulary had to necessarily be coming from a certain space, and also the cadence of the writing and all of that. So I studied that too. And those are the things where I'm excited about within sociology, is that I'm excited to see what we produce, and like taking 2020 as a watershed moment, because this is something that, you know, with my friends in the industry, like we talk about this all the time, but I'm excited to see us do it, and do it more, do it unapologetically, right? I don't believe that I need to exit the discipline. And even if I did, I'm always going to be a sociologist. I'm a world trained, you know, sociologist. I've earned my PhD, and it took a while to recognize I've earned that, and nobody can ever take that away. So whatever I write, in whatever form, okay, if I'm in the Atlantic or the Economist, if I'm writing for a university press or for a hood magazine, okay, if it comes out of my mouth and my brain, it's sociology, right? And I need to own that. That's something that wasn't, I didn't just wake up like that. I was never given permission to do that or think like that. It's something that I had to wrench for myself and make it to be true. And I have to continue to reinforce that within myself, because the academy ain't ready yet. But that doesn't mean that I am going to wait for it. And I hope that many of us will also come to that, some form of that realization, and make it do what it do. And I also look forward to, if we are in a Black Renaissance, which Dr. Ibram Kendi so beautifully ushered in for us in this latest Time magazine issue. If we're in a new Black Renaissance, what does that look like? And I'm looking forward to us opting into that space, and making space for the plentitude of Blackness, the heterogeneity of Blackness, as opposed to a flat, monolithic Blackness, right? So I would love to see it. I want to see how we show up in all kinds of ways, in ways where I will even be like, Black folks is doing that? We thinking like that? We getting down like that? And I want to love it. I want my imagination to be stretched. So for that's to me gonna be the generative space. Where is that? I don't know. Is it a place? Is it digital? How are we organizing? Are we organizing? So I want to be a part of whatever that looks like. but I don't know yet.
Let me just say that I am refreshed and renewed. Okay, like this is life. This is, I mean, and I mean that so, on so many different levels, because coming out of school and sort of like trying to figure out where I stand in this world, in this academic world, or any of this. It's been a struggle, and there has not been many people who can help me to navigate it in this way, right? I laugh about it because I get like 3 times a year where I can call Andrea and she'll give me, my life for a moment, and then I can go again for a little bit. And so, because I don't have that here at UT, and choosing to stay in Knoxville and choosing to do public sociology in the way that I'm doing it, in many ways it feels like I have to fight to claim that I'm a sociologist in this space, right? To like fight to be recognized as also as a sociologist, not just as a person who's doing community activism or whatever. But I'm doing it through my lens, and it matters in this, in this way. And whatever I say is coming through a sociological lens. So that is very, I appreciate that word on so many levels. And I feel like so many of us need to hear that, and we're not hearing it enough, right? And not given that space to really process these things, so I appreciate that. I feel like I might record it, like we'll keep this recording, and I might play it every 2 months when I need to remember.
One thing that I had to learn, that I'm saying this because I don't want for the generation of sociologists, all sociologists, but especially BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color. It took me too long to recognize not only that my work is sociology, irrespective of the form, that the professional landscape is abundant, not scarce. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but so many of our sociology training programs train us through a scarcity model in terms of, well, there are not many jobs, and to get a tenure track job, you got to do this, you got to do that. And that to me is a framing that is not conducive to producing your best work all the time. And if you reframe that into a landscape metaphor that's plentiful, that has plenty of ways to show up. So in an ecosystem, you need soil, you need air, there is grass, there are bumblebees that are pollinating. And if you think about this intellectual productivity space or industry as an ecosystem, as opposed to a tent with just one job, it's much more freeing. So maybe that does look like your sociology shows up as activism, and activism only, but sociology nonetheless. Maybe it shows up as community organizing and being an adjunct. Maybe it shows up tenure track. It shows up in all sorts of different ways. Film, working with children. Like, we need teachers. And we need folks who are developing appropriate curricula for our kids, so they're not continue to be fed this misinformation that too many of us have to unlearn as adults, right? There's so many roles to play and ways to get down. So I just want to offer that because it's freeing. It then looses the also that imposter syndrome of, well, if I'm not this, if I don't show up in this way, then maybe I don't belong in this space. And I'm here to say, we got beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, chicken, lamb. We got everything, you name it. And the table is plentiful, it is full, and we need to see it all to have a good meal, right?
Okay, so first of all, I can't believe that like we had that whole an hour. I can't even get my words out. Like a whole hour to talk with her and to learn from her and to just be like, I want to say be in the same space, but we weren't in the same room. So, but that was amazing, and I'm so grateful for her for sharing that knowledge with us. But William, what about you? Like, we're coming from this sort of academic life perspective. This conference is, this is kind of what we're expected to do. How do you get involved with the Appalachian Studies Association conference?
Yeah, I am not a fan of conferences, and I generally try to avoid them. But the Appalachian Study Conference has been one of those places where I've always kind of felt like, oh, okay, like this is where like the hillbillies are hanging out at. And so I approached the Appalachian Studies Conference not as a scholar, but as an activist, and doing anti-mountaintop removal work or doing rural broadband work. So it was really a place for us and other activists to kind of showcase the work and tactics and strategies that we've engaged in over the past year. And so we like to bring like, okay, here's what we did last year. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. Here's how we're moving these activist, social justice, environmental components forward. That said, so it was a very social space for me to see people that I hadn't seen in a long time or people that are doing similar work. But similarly, was already always asking like, well, where are the people of color in these movements and like these MTR movements and these other like alternative economic spaces. So it's not been a place where felt whole in. It's just a place that provides some support for a component of my life.
I think as a young scholar who was sort of looking for conferences, it's an expectation, and you sort of go looking to be renewed and refreshed and kind of excited about your work. And I think I didn't get that, and part of the reason I didn't get that was because I couldn't find my people there, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I was really looking forward to the 2020 conference because I knew that our people were gathering and we're going to take over the damn place. I was ready for a takeover, or at least be in our space, just like find our folks and like sit at the feet of people who I thought were pretty cool in Black Appalachian studies, and just learn and share and laugh and all of the things that we were planning to do. I was really, really, really excited about it because this was like a new chance, I get to do it again.
And from a different position. And I do want to say that like in most of these components was some kind of like public history. And that's kind of or public humanities is kind of how I've always approached and engaged with the conference in regards to this work that we've been doing. So whether I've did some presentations around, slave cemeteries or the documentation work in southeastern Ohio, but still it's always like you get the book and you look, and now it's a PDF, so you can just search Black or African
right
on the PDF and see exactly like where the sessions are at, but similarly go into those things and then balance them out afterwards. So one of the people that similarly has had and continues to have those types of experiences at the Appalachian Studies Conference is Jillian McCommons, who is at the University of Kentucky but is now a fellow, Carter G. Woodson Fellow. We'll let Jillian talk about herself.
Hey, Jillian.
What up?
I am a graduate student at the University of Kentucky in the history department. I'm currently on fellowship at the University of Virginia in their Carter G. Woodson Institute of African Studies. But before I was a graduate student, I lived in Brea, Kentucky. And I was just living there learning how to play the banjo, working at the Boone Tavern, and then I got a job in my field as a librarian. And that's when I went to work in Estill County at the public library there. So I did that for about a year. And then I worked for Appalachian Mountain Books for about another year, and then I went to graduate school. So I'm a librarian, historian in training, and I also play some banjo.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what was your first experience with the Appalachian Studies Association?
Well, so the first time I went, it was at Virginia Tech. And at that time I was working for Appalachian Mountain Books. So I was in the spot where the vendors are. And that was my first time. So I remember walking around kind of checking things out. And I remember there was like square dancing. There was like some other types of dance. There were different sessions. And I remember asking about Black people, where the Black people at? And I remember someone said, well, so-and-so's offering a paper at this session. And then there's another paper at this session. So it was kind of disconnected. And I had been to other academic conferences before. And I thought, well, is there like a track, where I can get some exposure to learning about Black people in the region, but also like Latinx people, indigenous people, like where's everybody? Because it was predominantly white. So I was looking to see, having lived in Appalachia for a little bit and knowing Black people were everywhere, I wanted to know where we were. So it was kind of disparate. It was like you had to go to a paper session specifically about Black people to even see a Black person. So that was my first impression. And then working as a vendor, I only saw like maybe a handful of people. So I was like, are Black people coming to this conference? I mean, I was there. I felt like I was definitely one of a very few. So that's what raised the question for me initially about the conference, Black people, and representation.
That is so interesting because that was the first conference that I went to.
So how, since that time that at Blacksburg, how have you seen it shift and change, or have you seen it shift and change at all?
So in terms of seeing it shift and change, I can't say that I've been to so many that I can see a transition. I can say that I've tried to be active in making the point to keep saying the types of things that Elandria said and that other people have said. So when it came around the University of Kentucky and I was asked, hey, do you want to participate in the planning of this? I was most deaf going to say all the things that I hadn't been seeing, whether it was in Blacksburg or on the program for Asheville, or even just in conversations with people about the association. It's like, listen, that, okay, if it's going to be here and I'm going to be involved, then we need to talk about who's there, who's getting a say, and, issues of representation and power. So I think the transition I've seen in a short time has been, there's finally people talking about these things. But in terms of like physical change, I haven't seen that yet. And that's kind of what I wanted to help happen, when I was given the opportunity to say, okay, do some planning around this. And for me, a big part of that is Black space. Bringing Black people together in a space so that we can see each other, collaborate together. And that's a huge part of it.
Tell me how you got involved. Tell us how you got involved in that planning for last year's conference.
So I was at UK and Catherine Newfont, Dr. Newfont, I think was like the head of the association at the time. She's one of my professors. And she asked me, hey, are you interested? So they had like a nomination process. So I applied and then I was nominated to be on the programming committee. So we would meet probably like every month in that year leading up to the conference, sometimes more frequently, to talk about what we wanted to see happen. So when we meet at the Appalachian Center, it was important for me to say, okay, I think we should have a social space for Black people. The goal was to bring people together in it. And luckily, as one of the coordinators, I could call for that to happen. I could say, okay, can we get some rooms where we can do this, first of all? And this is also like my background in libraries. Like, this is what I did, was programming and trying to get people together to talk about things. So it's kind of an extension of what I've always been doing. So I was asked to be involved. I was glad to be. And I think part of the asking had to do with an acknowledgement that she knew the association wasn't where it could be. And so they were purposely asking for people who had these different voices to come and get involved in this way. So I guess you could see that's part of the transition happening.
Do you what did that committee look like when you were a part of it, the planning committee?
So the committee started small, but then it kind of mushroomed out because it was like, well, we got this group, and we got this group, and we got this administrator. So it just kept growing and growing, which in some ways could be good, but it's also like, I think it's just hard to have an association where the annual meeting moves every year, because then how can you have any kind of continuity? And how can one committee from a previous year kind of learn and then so on? How can there be communication about how can we carry forth these things? So Black Appalachians was made a major theme, and I kind of pushed to help make that happen. There was the environment, Black Appalachia, then there were some other themes. And I think that that's the first time. I could be wrong, and Wilburn Hayden can speak to this better than I can. But I think that that's the first time that Black people were made a major theme, and not just, there are going to be 3 or 4 talks, we'll put those in the same kind of area. What I wanted to have happen, and I talked to William a lot about this, was, so there were 2 conference rooms. And I think at one point we talked about having some films playing that Black in Appalachia had produced, to have that up, to have a conversation space for scholars to be able to talk. Let's get all the Black people that go to Black in Appalachia or who work on Black people in Appalachia together in the same room to see each other, because we're talking about this huge region. I wanted to kind of break it up from being like maybe 1 or 2 people who are well known to work on this area to like, oh wait, there's people all over this country and probably people in other countries that work on this. Why don't we get together and figure out ways we can collaborate and amplify people's work? So really at the root of it was this kind of like collaborative, cooperative ethos that I'm trying to like, I wanted to help bring. It's like, how can we work together in the work that we're doing? How can we see each other, support each other? So my vision was like, we're coming together and we're going to start working together. And we're going to start lifting each other up, which I think is what Black spaces try to do. And everything that comes with that. We have ideological differences, there's diversity, but that comes out of that kind of coming together and talking. And we can't really get to that and advance Black Appalachian studies or advance what's happening in our communities if we can't get together and talk about it. So that was my hope for the space, that it would kind of kick off to more work and kind of advance the study.
So coming out of that experience, the conference didn't actually happen, right? The Black Appalachian space didn't occur. So from that experience and that like very thoughtful and well put together work, what now? Like, what do you see right now, and what now? Where are we at now?
Well, I heard you ask the question of, kind of like, what would a Black Appalachian space look like in the association? I'm like, and the first thing I thought was, will it be within the association? I'm not sure, because right now the association doesn't really, unless there's a history that I haven't learned about, it doesn't really have the roots to grow that tree. So I'm not entirely sure that the association is the space for us to try to grow Black study, Black community work out of. I think that even now, seeing the emphasis on anti-racism, that's still very much trying to teach white people about racism, Black people. It's still not a space where we are talking to each other.
Come through, girl. Come through. Sorry, I couldn't help.
That's not the project. That's not really the project I'm interested in being involved in. I'm interested in talking to Black people about us. So I don't know that that's going to be the space to do that. But I think that there needs to be a Black-led, Black-centered space for people in Appalachia. I'm not sure that we need to even try to carve anything out of the association. That would be really for us or by us. FUBU. We need some FUBU.
I feel you. I feel you. I feel you. That is real. That is very real.
There are political choices that the association makes and can make that can show solidarity with Black people. And I think that there are people who are invested in trying to push the association to do that. But there are also people who are like, well, that's another project. I'm more invested in helping our communities right now. Because there's just like serious things going on. It's not just about, I mean, I'm a historian, but it's not just about that. It's about current day, present material, physical, emotional conditions of Black people physically in the region, but also in the diaspora who moved out of the region, who are still very much connected and come back to. Then there are people like me who decide to be a part of the region after living here. So I think that to me is a more pressing issue than trying to teach and reteach. Because who knows how long that can take. I studied the Black Appalachian Commission, and this is what they tried to do. This really is, like, they were founded in 69, went to 75, and they were all about, we need to get together with people from across this region so we can talk about what Black people need to do. They understood that there were power in numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think that what happens when you come looking at it from sort of a white Appalachian-centric view, it's like, well, this idea that the region's predominantly white, so that, if you're not white, then you're, something about predominance and significance has been equated. And that needs to be broken down. This idea that, a space is predominantly this way, so we're just gonna focus on these people because they predominate. And I think that's problematic, and that's something I think that the commission tried to mess with, and something that I try to mess with in my work. To say, like, less numbers doesn't mean less significant, especially when you look at the cultural and material impacts that Black people have had through and through.
The other thing too, I think that is important that we kind of mentioned about earlier is just sort of like where academic culture meshes with like community activism and and community culture, right? Because academic culture is a very ascending culture, right? It's very much that is how you are rewarded. You're rewarded for ascending, and so if there's that disconnect between this is the way that academic culture works, and this might not be something that's beneficial to our community, right? Because we are collective people, then there might be then there definitely is need for a reimagining of what this should look like and can look like, right? That would in some ways disconnect from academic culture, or disconnect in particular ways from academic culture, right? Because it's not to because academics do bring something that's important, right? That's why we doing what we're doing, but there's a space where there can be more balance that we don't always see. So I think that's important.
Yeah, and who better than to tell academia what it needs than the people outside of it? Now, There's people in academia don't want to hear that. They're like, nah, we know, we know what's best. But I think that's also part of Black culture. It's like a lot of us don't go to college, separate from our communities. We go to get something and take it back, right? The whole Sankofa idea. But for me, it's to like, I want my people with me there while I'm there. Right. So it's like, how can we transform these spaces? How can we bring people in? How can we listen to what they would like to see on these grounds? I remember her giving this awesome speech and pleading with the association. When I saw her there making that plea, it was clear to me, like, okay, this is something that Black people have been saying. And here we are in the 21st century still pleading with white folks to open the doors. And really, it's like not even open the doors, but release control. I remember that vividly.
Miss Carol Judy passed away not that long ago. And in the vein of her and Frank Adams, who we found out is really sick this morning, I want to flip. People know I love cooperatives and solidarity economy. So I want to do a little pushing. I hate the transition. I hate just transition. The framework sucks. Just transition to what? So we are spending a whole bunch of time in a region moving money to something we don't know what we want. So how in the world are we supposed to say what we want when we can't even name it? All we know is we want it to be done justly. Well, in the history of our country, we don't actually know what the hell that means. So we cannot talk about Appalachia being colonized when the same people colonized the place. So I just want us to hold what colonization means. And if we want to just transition, that might mean something we don't actually want, because it might mean a whole bunch of these people in the room sitting up and walking out. So since you don't really want to go anywhere, because then it would mean putting the land back into the hands of the people who were here before. Right, okay. We're just going to put the Seminole on, and in the body and in the soul. So let's talk for me about what it means to go beyond just transition. What it means to build beautiful solutions that have values at the core that honor our humanity, that honor our soul, that we have a spiritual revolution. And spiritual not just of God, but of our earth and of our place, that you feel in your soul even when you're sitting down, right? So I get to listen and study and talk to people. I work at Highlander, right? So I get to be around people all day. And so we ended up doing all this work with young people because I was so done with the fact that, like, my family, my twin, all the people I'm around, we do really good programs, but then people cannot do nothing. There is no job. There is no infrastructure. Me and Ada Smith, who is supposed to be here in this thing called Bali Fellowship Program. You go to the thing in California, people go, let's talk about a corporation's transitioning to cooperative ownership. And you're like, well, what if the corporations don't like you? Like, what if they don't want to convert to you because they think you should die? And they're like, oh, And so that is the transition around the country that we're dealing with right now, right? Is that how do we create stuff for us that actually makes logical sense? I feel like part of the thing that we're in right now is that we are in a political time when the upsurge is happening of protest, right? But we are not actually spending as much energy in creation. And we're not going, you have a gene. Let's make jeans. You have a shoe. We're instead creating really cute things that in the end of the day are not going to push out capitalism. They're not going to stop neoliberalism. We have to study, y'all. And we have to study in ways that say, what are people doing in different places? And what are we doing that we can learn from and deepen in? And not just say, oh, yeah, that thing was so hot. Oh. But instead interrogate and say, what about it needed some work? What about it needed shifting? And getting out of the, like, I'm going to have to be in competition with you for resources. So because I have to look so good, I have to prop my shit up. So, well, you can't actually say, no, that's wrong. So I'm going to say one more thing because I know it's time for me to go. So, well, no, there's two. So I have to just say, yay for SEAL and stay being around for 10 years. We helped start STAY 10 years ago at the Appalachian Studies Association conference when there wasn't as many young people in the room. And people talked about us and didn't let us on stage talking about ourselves. And so I just want to say shout out to all the STAY folks, shout out to all the Appalachian Fellowship, Transition Fellowship people for like putting into action what it takes to make transition on the ground. The last thing is, maybe Appalachia is a part of the South. If you actually want to change white supremacy in this region, actually make it be a part of the South. Because then you can own that oil drilling is just as bad as mountain removal. And whiteness does not take over and people give money to white people because it makes them feel damn good. If we actually shift how we move money and how we say we want to shift stuff, because that's what I see. What I actually see, I'm sorry, you got me up here, so I'm going to say one last, I'm sorry. I have been so mad, I left doing work in Appalachia. Left! Was so pissed didn't see me, didn't see Stephanie Tyree in West Virginia, didn't even see us. Acting like we didn't exist. Acting like Kiara, who works back there, don't exist. And think that black young people in this region don't matter. Latino people in this region don't matter. There are black immigrants that are deported every day in Appalachia. And they don't matter. And so in order to keep people here and keep people healthy, we have to create. We have to build. We cannot just be angry and think. We must make things happen so people can own their own realities.